Welcome to this tutorial on tips and tricks of the master thesis. In this tutorial I want to say something about the following three things. So first I will give some tips about the process of writing the thesis. This includes where you should focus in which period of the thesis and some things you have to take into account when actually writing the thesis. The second thing is about communication with your supervisors. Supervisors are human. They are often very busy, so this is important to keep in mind. I'll give some tips on how to communicate effectively with your supervisor. And third, I think also a very important element is backstopping. Many students fail to finish their thesis in time, and this causes a lot of problems, not only financially, but also psychological stress. I give some tips on how to avoid this, although it can never be avoided entirely, probably. So what about the process? Well, this is a bit of my personal experience of what could go wrong in the thesis and how to avoid the common pitfalls. So in the beginning of the thesis, you should focus on finding information. But many students focus excessively on finding reference papers and starting to read a lot. However, this is not always very useful. Often it's better to focus on 3 or 4 key references and agree with your supervisor on which those 3 or 4 key references are, or ask your supervisor to provide them. And then check the reference list of these key papers and build a reference database, probably in RefWorks, for which I've given another tutorial. So the thing is, in the beginning, not to read too much. You should have some overview of the field, look for surveys on your topic, just enough to formulate some key hypotheses and some key contributions that the thesis wants to make. But don't start reading 20 to 30 articles on your topic, because that will probably take you a few weeks and you'll be cramped in time in the end. So actually, if you look at finding the data, I think students in general should put more emphasis on building or finding the data in the beginning. So put more emphasis on building your database early relative to putting emphasis on the related literature. And do this and actually agree with your supervisor on the final to be used database early in the process. So set it up in Excel, for example, and communicate with your supervisor early and agree, well, this is what we're going to make, this is what we're going to set in Stata, etc., etc. So that you can start working with this early. Actually, what I often see is that students find out in the end of the process that they have no results, meaningful results, or that their data are not okay, or that there are all kinds of missing things, and it doesn't work. If you come to this conclusion early in the process, you can adjust it. So a third thing is not to focus too much on getting significant results in general, but certainly not in the beginning. Often data have to be cleaned, outliers be removed. There are often many mistakes. So don't get yourself put off too early by not getting significant results. And also, it's not a scientific attitude. So simply focus on, this is the data set, this is what we're going to test, and this is what we're going to present as a result, whether it's significant or not. Of course, it's nice that you have hypotheses that that work out, etc. But simply also to finish the process. Often the process takes too long because students want to have the right results that they were expecting, and that's often a pity. And it pays off to invest some time in getting results from Stata into Word, so the techniques. And to your supervisor. So know how files works. It takes a lot of time to cut and paste all kinds of results into some versions of your paper. Often for your supervisor it's enough that he has a dual file and your data set so that he can see the results intermediate. And also know, for example, how things like the Outrecht command in Stata works, because it's very useful of getting your tables in a nice way in Word without actually cutting and pasting all the time. And the last tip of the process is that when writing, make sentences that could be your final ones. I often see that people write in an unconcentrated way, just simply to have a lot of pages, and then when the end of the thesis comes there, they have to rewrite large parts of the thesis to have a good grade. So if you invest a bit of time when you actually write your first thesis, for example by checking your paragraph 2 or 3 times, actually this will save you a lot of time and stress at the end of the process. Then about communication about your thesis. Not specifically with your supervisor or your fellow students, it's always good to talk to people about your thesis, especially to non-economists, and make sure that they understand it. I often say that if your father and mother understand what you're doing, you're actually on the right track, unless of course your father and mother are brilliant. But also for yourself, if you can explain it to non-economists or people in the street, you probably have a good grasp of your subject and your contribution. If you fail to do so, then don't question the intelligence of others. Maybe you don't have a good understanding of the topic yourself. So then, communication with your supervisor. As a general remark, many of you will write the master thesis in the 4th period. And in the 4th period there are many holidays. So Queen's Day or King's Day nowadays. And also kind of small, short holidays. And often teachers also have no teaching obligations in the 4th period, so they may go on holiday early to avoid cramped planes, etc. So make sure that you know where your supervisor is and that he knows where you are. So ask this in one of your first meetings when he's going on holiday, when he will be back, etc. And make sure that he knows your plans. So the second thing is always make a next appointment, have a next appointment in your agenda with your supervisor. I know that people view this differently. So some supervisors will tell you, yeah, you make an appointment when you have results, etc. But well, to my expertise, this is actually a recipe for failure. So it's better to have an appointment in your agenda and actually cancel it, not on a short notice, but be sure when for yourself when you're going to see your supervisor and make sure that he knows. It's not that you have to go to these meetings without any results, but be sure that you have a process of communication with your supervisor. And then share information effectively with your supervisor and discuss this in the first of the meetings. So using Dropboxes is much better than losing all kinds of emails. Using do files, often making appointment with supervisors, especially when they have many theses to supervise, is very difficult. But if you are able to use Skype with your supervisor, this helps a lot. And even things like file sharing systems like TeamViewer, where you can both work on the same thing. Some supervisors actually have this. But Dropboxes and Skype, things like that are really useful in the process. And ask your supervisor whether he uses it and whether he can use it with your thesis. Now, a point related to this type of meetings, be aware that your supervisor often in the back of his mind creates an opinion about your thesis in the process. Not only will look at your final results. And often the thesis, the supervisor will manage your expectations on what he thinks in an early stage. So if you start late and communicate imperfect materials with your supervisor and have no idea where you're going until the end, very difficult for your supervisor then to give you a high grade. And often this results in students postponing handing in the master thesis because they think, okay, well, I have to make it better and better and better and work more and more to convince the supervisor that I have actually worked on it. So be professional right from the start. And even if you write a crap thesis at the end, well, not crap of course, it will matter also the process in which you have approached this. And last tip is some supers have up to 20 theses. Of course this is not good, but often if you communicate with your supervisor in an oral meeting but also in emails, if you give 1 or 2 lines and remind him what your thesis is about, this is really effective. So of course he or she should know the topic of your thesis, but in practice it happens a lot that they have to think, what was it about, what was the problem, etc. So if you proactively help your supervisor a bit in this, that I think is professional. So the last slide is about actually finishing the thesis in time. Well, there are a few things. So if students have no lectures, etc., they often think, okay, I can take my job early, I can make some money, I can travel back home to my parents, etc. This is a failure for problem. This is a recipe for problems. So finish the thesis first. Simply take the 8-9 weeks and focus on that only. It's very tempting to do it differently, but especially also for students from foreign countries. If you go back, it's very difficult to get in contact. If you don't make it before the summer period, then your supervisor will be on holiday and will not be able to hand in the grades in time, and then you have to pay new tuition fees, etc. So invest a bit in these first 8 weeks. Also realize that your supervisor is indeed human. Of course, the supervisor should know when the thesis process should end and should plan correctly to grade your thesis and hand it in. But this is often problematic. So anticipate this. Make sure that in your meetings you know that your supervisor knows when to hand in your grade. If you have special requests of having the grade in early to avoid extra cost, etc., be sure that your supervisor knows, and put this on paper in email. Don't tell the supervisor, but write an email and write the details about the process to him or her. So the last thing is about the psychology. Don't fool yourself. I often hear students who tell me, yeah, I have to improve this or that, etc. But this is often simply an excuse for not working hard enough on the thesis. Okay, this sounds hard, but you can also look at it in another way. Often students underestimate the psychological difficulties of actually ending their student status. So as long as they are writing the thesis or correcting the thesis or have a story that they are correcting the thesis, they avoid hard questions by their parents and friends of why you're not looking for a job, etc., etc. Do you have any plans to go? Okay, this is all fine if you know what you're doing, but often people underestimate how big this psychological pressure at the end can be. So if you are aware of that, maybe this helps you cope with it a bit better.